Welcome to the 2021 team preview for the Hangzhou Spark. Here at Plat Chat, we are joined by the most esteemed of colleagues. It's Sharkman Jaws, who's, I mean, you're looking like it was the 20th of April. You are out here at 4:20 p.m. right now. What's good, Jaws?
Well, mate, you want to tell what day I've had? Well, mate, I went to the gym. Realized I completely forgot because I haven't been to the gym in a long time that my blood sugar just dips below probably about minus 100. I don't know how you calculate blood sugar, but it's pretty low. If it's on the scale of Oblivion stats, yeah, I'm in the negative right now, past novice tier. And now for the rest of the day, recording a few podcasts, try to recoup that sugar by eating a whole bar of Toblerone. Did it work? Did it fuck?
You went to the gym and then ate a whole bar of Toblerone?
I also ate a ton of other food too, but my blood sugar was like, not today, bitch. And now I'm here.
Your life
Are you okay,
is...
Joss? Do you need to talk?
I've been talking for 4 straight hours, pal. I don't think I need to talk anymore.
Well, we are going to talk a little bit more. We're going to talk about the Hangzhou Spark. This team, I want to start the same way we did with the Chengdu Hunters. I want you guys to sell me on the Spark. Why should I be excited about the Spark this year compared to what they've done previously? Jaws, why, apart from the fact that you're going to bribe me with an entire thing of Toblerone, why should I watch the Spark next year? Why should I stay up till stupid APAC hours watching them?
We trust in Element Mystic, and we trust in their scouting. Mr. Takayaki and MCD being launched into the roster, although Takayaki comes of age as of the 18th of April. He then turns 18, which means he's eligible. But Element Mystic have proven time and time again they can field the top tier talents of any Overwatch League team. That is why I am most excited. Oh, and of course, the return. The ever elusive, almost like Snillo in a way, going into the forest picking mushrooms in Finland, but he actually lives in Korea. So-Min-Soo is back, baby. He's back on the roster, and with a potential Zarya meta with the double bubble dive and the rush comps, Zarya's pretty damn good. Could even step in, of course, to play the tank role, even though he is listed as a DPS. That is why I am most excited about Hangzhou Spark this season.
All right, for anyone who isn't an Element Mystic simp, Jonathan, why are you excited about the Spark next year?
I mean, I can give you another headline if you want, like I did in the Chengdu Hunters episode.
Give me the news headline. What's the news?
Here's the problem. You know, if I wanted to get clicks on Reddit, I'd probably go with So-Min-Soo is back, because that would get the people going. Nobody knows why. It just gets the people going.
Exclamation mark, question mark, shocked emoji.
If I wanted to go for the franchise, the team overall, I'd be like the super extreme, over-exaggerated headline would be like the most ambitious crossover in Overwatch history.
Okay.
Which is not true. But we have a ton of Chinese star players on this team. And then we also have really good Korean players on this team. And that's really the only way this headline makes any sense whatsoever. So I haven't really told you anything of substance with that headline.
No, I like it though. I like it because it does bring up one of the things I'm most interested in this year, which is this team has 12 fucking players on it. And they're not quite, but they're basically split down the middle between Chinese and Korean. They actually have 3 Korean DPS players and only 1 Chinese DPS player, so it doesn't quite work out. But essentially, they have a full Chinese team plus 1 like Korean sub, and then a full Korean team. It's literally split. Like they have 1 flex support that's Chinese and Korean, 1 main support that's Chinese and Korean, 1 main tank, 1 off tank, and then the DPS, like I said, is the only way in which you couldn't build out teams like this. And I am intrigued by this prospect because
I mean, it doesn't look like an actual team roster. It looks like a Coachella lineup.
Coachella lineup.
Coachella?
Please explain.
No, it just looks like a Coachella lineup where it's like the individual names, just like, and you know how like it starts with like really big text and then it goes smaller, like the lesser known artist it is, and it's like,
Who would you say is headlining?
Architect, Surin Su, and then it's like Takoyaki, Gushue, Ligue, Godspeed, and then it's like Shai, Mika, IDK. It's like I didn't do that any justice because obviously Shai is great and Gushue is great. I just had random names on a roster, but you get the idea.
I get what you mean, though. I get what you mean. It does. I mean, it is ludicrous. It's a little like Chengdu in that they've bought the dip exceptionally. Like this was supposed to be the season.
Stock comparisons.
Oh yeah,
dude.
the stock comparisons are coming out in force. I haven't been investing. Bad idea for anyone as stupid as me to get into the stock market, lose all my money in 3 seconds flat. But I feel like this year it is a year in which a lot of teams are trying to minimize costs. We're going into online. You don't have to pay for your teams to be traveling around the world as much. You don't have to pay for them to. You don't have to be paying to be running events and such. These kind of expenses. And also, a lot of other teams have decided to trim down the fat on their roster. They've gone for like 9-player rosters instead of 12, or they've gone for a 7-man roster where you just have that one sub that's there, and you can very much tell what the core is for a lot of the teams. You have like some roles like DPS where people like to take 4 or sometimes even 5, but a lot of the teams just have a core where you know who is going to play. When I look at this team and Chengdu, who we just did a review of a couple of days ago that you'll have already watched, I'm sure, and hit the subscribe and like button, haven't you? Haven't you? Yeah, for those teams, it feels like the exact opposite approach, where they've just invested heavily in Chinese talent and are trying to build that out. Makes a lot of sense for the Hangzhou Spark. They're adding to people like Gushue, who they've always had in the team. But I'd like to pose a question to you. Do you think the correct thing for the Hangzhou Spark to do next year is to run a Korean team and a Chinese team? Do you think that is viable? And do you think that that would be best for them?
Oof, that's a tough question. I've actually really tried to do some research here and try to get some answers to my questions, because I know there are a couple of examples, or I don't actually know, but I've heard this somewhere, and maybe you could tell me if I'm right or wrong. But I've heard somewhere, I can't remember why, that some Chinese contenders team actually scrim in English because they have some Korean talent on their Chinese teams.
Sure, yeah.
So I've really tried to get this answer of like how the communication will be on the Hangzhou Spark, if they're actually going to come in English to make it better, or the Chinese players going to come Chinese to like their Chinese counterparts. I've tried to find the answer, but like I've searched around, haven't been able to find anything of substance. So I don't know. I'm not willing to sit here and say that like, oh my God, it's so crazy. How are they going to communicate between their Chinese and Korean players? Because I actually don't know whether they're going to separate those groups or if they have a way to like make them come together. And it could make all the difference, which is why this is such a wacky team, because there's this unknown element to like the communication and team building aspect that I don't have the answer for. I don't know if you guys have the answer. I don't know the answer, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to rotate this roster. I would like to imagine that they're going to communicate mostly in English, but it does scare me because I don't know how much experience some of these players have finding a language to bridge all of the pieces.
I don't know whether there have been any in-depth interviews this off-season, but I know in prior seasons, people asked the Hangzhou Spark how they communicate, and they said that they do use English, but they also have other. It's not like they're all trying to be fluent English. They'll use Korean words for certain concepts. Like I think I'm right in using these examples because they're getting dredged from my memory. But I think it was stuff like when the tanks need to be contesting the point and like rotating, ping-ponging. You know, this like concept that the Koreans use of the ping-ponging the tanks. They would use the Korean term for that because the concept is already built and packaged into that wording. But I think they used different words for some other Chinese concept, like because previously they had I can't remember what the synergy was. Maybe it was I can't remember, but there was like 2 Chinese players that had like some team play that was between the 2 of them, and they were trying to use like a Chinese nickname for that, and then the other generic conversations or calls were a lot of the time in English as well. But I think they tried to blend things and make it as comfortable as possible for their players, rather than trying to stick to the label of English and everything must be in English, or Korean, everything must be in Korean. I think it was a little more flexible, which sounds messy from the outside, and it probably is messy for somebody coming in. But if it works and your players are comfortable with it, it works. And the Chinese and Korean talent at the tier 2 level, a lot of them have good English. It's hard to get, like, it's not listed on Wikipedia or like anywhere that like speaks very good English. So you never exactly know from an outside point of view, unless you go and talk to the coaches specifically, which can be very hard in these examples. But I know that there was some people like who was it? I think it was the person that works for the Guangzhou Charge. I think it was one of their staff members put out a tweet chain saying that he was disappointed that more Chinese players weren't being given opportunities. And he said that the visa issues aren't as bad as you would think. The language is actually really good. Like, most of the Chinese players in contenders have good enough English to be able to compete at the same level as any Korean player would as well. And so he was trying to break down some of the assumptions that people tend to make about Chinese talent being more difficult to integrate into team systems. So I'm inclined to give this team the benefit of the doubt, because they've already had 2 years to build a system that integrates Korean and Chinese players together. They've done the groundwork of putting that shit in place. They've had good performances before. Like, they placed 4th in their opening season, right? Yeah, in 2019 they finished 4th.
Pretty high, yeah.
And then in 2020 they were decent. They weren't bad by any means. So I think the groundwork should have been set here for them to mingle their rosters. The only reason I'm making this question that they might split them apart is because they literally have one of every role in Chinese and Korean. Yeah. And it just screams that they're going to do that, even though I have no other reason to believe that they would.
Yeah,
I would be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, so would I. I think at this stage in Overwatch, just talking about the Overwatch scene overall, I think we've left that sort of like separating mentality in the past, and I think it's all about creating the best combination of 2 worlds. It has to be I'll ask you guys, it has to be a coincidence that they got one of each role, right? Because I can't think of any tangible reason to why it would be beneficial to split them up.
I think the only reason that I can come up with is that now, if we are discarding the idea that they're going to make an A team, well, maybe not an A team and a B team, but like 2 sister teams. Sister teams have not really been a thing in Overwatch. They haven't worked when people have tried them particularly. The only successful examples have been like, I don't know, Atlanta Academy, or the mixed teams that Shockers made to try and scrim their main team before they go to the finals. Like, the experiment with Seoul's A team and B team was a bit of an interesting experiment, but it didn't really go anywhere in the long term. So I don't think sister teams are the answer in Overwatch compared to like something like League of Legends, where they have existed. But my thought process was, maybe they've done this so that if the gamble on the Chinese talent that they've picked up doesn't work out, like, for example, Liga is fantastic. He is an elite level off tank that has come into the league. But if something arises where he doesn't fit into your system, that you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at his VODs. It's something intangible. It's something to do with, like, he just doesn't get the blend of languages that you're using. It's an unusual team dynamic, and maybe he doesn't get it. Maybe there's a culture clash for one of these Chinese players that's brought in, and you have to resort to the easier option of making your team more and more Korean. That is the only reasoning that I can maybe see the logic for. Otherwise, maybe coincidence.
I understand that.
I am worried, though, that like, as you present it, and we don't know, I suppose we don't know if that is what we're doing, and it's not a criticism of you, but if you're trying to get ahead of the problem like that, I worry that they will overcomplicate it or overthink it. Sure. Because there might just be a scenario where actually the best solution for the team is to play Takoyaki at main tank most of the time, and then play Ligue at off tank. But then you start getting into these hoops of like, well, if we play Gushui with Ligue, that might be better than Takoyaki and Ligue, so we want to play Takoyaki and Bernard. And it's like these unnecessary options you have to overcomplicate things. I suppose that is what I'm worried about with this roster, is actually some people are actually giving this team the benefit of the doubt. I'm uncertain and worried until I actually see it in action. So I'm being cautious with this team. And that's part of why it's so difficult to predict this team. Because on paper, if we just talked about this team on paper, it would be sick. There's a ton of talent on this roster, just on paper, individually, right? But how it comes together, I have my concerns. Some people are optimistic. And I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong. But personally, I think there is a lot of potential problems here if you're competing at a regular season.
Let's go through some of the talent then and talk about the good sides of the Spark. They have 12 players, so I don't want to dwell on each one and take forever going through them. But like a quick look at the tank line. If you had to look at Gushui and Takoyaki, Joe's already talked a bit about Takoyaki playing for Element Mystic in the past as well. He was decent at the contenders level. Do you think that it's going to be a regular occurrence, barring any like we overcomplicated it or we're playing him because he's Korean and that helps with language issues? If we judge them purely on paper, do you think there's many examples where Takoyaki gets fielded over Gushui?
I mean, I think it comes down to the Orisa and the Wrecking Ball, right? Because I think you mentioned that Gushui specializes in the Reinhardt and Winston. Sorry, did you ask that question to Jaws?
No, it was just an open question. I'm interested in both of your...
Go on, John.
I'm interested in both.
No, but I think it's one of those things where like Takoyaki complements Gushui in a way and like rounds out the hero pool. If you wanted to speak more about that, Jaws.
Well, I was going to say Gushui's his Winston is just elite. Actually just elite tier. I see Takoyaki stepping in more for the Reinhardt than anything else, because that's just kind of what he played, always kind of has done in contenders. But then if we're just going this purely on pay, because I think that is quite an interesting thing to look at, what you said maybe a couple of minutes ago, was Ligue is probably the best Zarya that they're going to have. Like, straight up. The guy's a monster, but then do they put him with Takoyaki? Don't know. Maybe they put Gushui on the Reinhardt. But I think personally they're going to have Gushui on with these more double bubbles if they do give them even playing time, and then have Takoyaki on the Rhine, because that's what he's been playing for, and I think it's easily his best hero. I can't really say much more than that, to be honest, if they're going to go for this 50-50 split. And I mentioned it in a previous episode, but some of the players I spoke to when we were doing the Steel Series tournament, Steel Series Invitational, a lot of the players were saying, at the moment, it's very much about what you feel comfortable with as a team. And obviously it does become map dependent, but if you do feel like your double bubble is better, you can run that against the rush. It's like not an issue as long as the map kind of allows you to run it somewhat safely. I mean, this might be a good example of a map actually. Being Lighthouse, you can take the high ground with the double bubble pretty easily, and obviously the Ryan Zaya at that point, the rush likes to just kind of hold the point. In my head, that's what they do. Whether they end up doing that, not entirely sure. Takoyaki, I would say he would need a little bit of breaking in first, definitely. Of course, he is eligible on the 18th. Like, that's just before the season starts, am I correct?
Yeah. No, that's just after. I think the season begins April 16th, but I mean, that's 16th, just nitpicking. Okay.
So basically, yes, he's eligible for the start of the season too. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, because I just see Takoyaki running the Rhine, Gushui running the Winston, because they're both cracked out on those roles.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm not exactly sure who runs the ball for them, to be honest. Takoyaki wasn't somebody that I've spent a lot of time watching outside of him playing quite a bit of Reinhardt, but I can't remember whether he's got a great ball or something that he might bring out. And I don't know whether Gushui does particularly either, because it wasn't something that he opted into previously. Now, whether that's even going to be a relevant situation for this year, we don't know. But either way, they should have a very competent main tank, and I think whether they want to rotate it or whatever, I don't think the main tank is going to be the part that lets this team down, and I don't think the off tank is either, because Liga or Bernard, whoever you field, is going to be elite. I mean, Bernard is. I think Liga actually has more potential, perhaps.
I think he has more potential over Bernard.
But I still think Bernard's very, very good. And even if you have to resort back to what on paper looks to be the weaker line of Takoyaki and Bernard at some point during the season, you can absolutely get away with that, and it's still going to be fine to get you wins against most teams. There's more potential with the Chinese tank line, I think. But even if the worst case scenarios of them like messing everything up, unless the whole team just fails from a standpoint of we don't even know what we're doing because you're messing with us so much. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to be that bad. And at its best, this line of Gushui and Liga has massive potential.
Do you think there's a world Sominsu comes in for the Zarya? Because in my head, I'm like, yeah, maybe he does actually. And maybe at one point he actually comes in for because his Zarya is pretty ridiculous. Like, it's kind of disgusting.
I don't know.
Do you think there's a possibility for that or no?
Normally, I would say no. I don't know what the fuck Sominsu's doing on this roster, so exactly. I don't know. I don't know. Like, maybe. He's one of the only players in the league that's on DPS where I could buy the argument that they've signed him for his Zarya, because I don't know what other heroes they want him for.
I know, because they also think they've got so much flexibility in the DPS. Well, I guess we'll get to it in a minute, but they have so much flexibility in the DPS.
Yeah. Do you have any more thoughts about the off-tank situation?
Well, I wanted to ask you people, do you see this kind of scenario where like maybe Bernard plays some of the Diva and maybe Liga plays like the Sigma or Zarya, or like however you want to flip that around? Can you see a scenario in where like they have two off-tanks specializing in certain off-tank heroes, sort of like what we talked about Takoyaki and Gushui having like different specialist picks when it comes to the main tank heroes? Or do you think that they'll stick with one for the most of the time?
My gut feeling is that they're going to try and stick with one. And I think that it would probably be... I think it would be better to try and stick with Liga. Now, if there are hero pool problems with Liga that haven't been evident during contenders because the meta hasn't been there or the competition hasn't been there, and we find out that Liga isn't as well-rounded as it may appear, then Bernard would be an excellent addition. But I don't know where those holes are now, looking in. Like, the problem when we look at content, or the problem when I look at contenders VODs, is that you want to look at the most recent stuff because it's when it's the most relevant stuff, but it doesn't show a huge range of metas. Like, the most recent tournaments in contenders, if you look over the past year, did not have the same range of meta diversity that the Overwatch League did, because the Overwatch League was messing around with hero pools and all sorts of other shit. So I think I don't know the answer to that question until we hit a bunch of different metas, but I would be trying to stick with Gushui and Liga as much as possible, unless you're forced outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah, so would I. I think that's probably your highest. Yeah, I think so too. But I feel worried, and maybe I have wrong inclinations, but what I do not want them to do, and I'm not saying they will do it, but what I do not want them to do is get into this extreme territory where Takoyaki plays some main tanks and Gushui plays some main tanks, and then Bernard plays some off tanks and Liga plays some off tanks. So I do agree with you that I mean, maybe they've talked about this somewhere and I haven't read it, okay? Because I feel like I'm missing out on so much like information on what's going on with this team. Like, I don't feel well researched about this team because it feels very chaotic. But I really do hope they for the most of the time they play Liga and Gushui to complement Liga, and maybe sub in Takoyaki once in a while, which is a shame because Bernard is really fun to watch and I enjoy seeing him in the league. So I hope he had a tough year.
Last year, though,
he did.
Almost a brand new London Spitfire roster, right? I mean, you had people like Glister, who is at least my second pick for best pickup DPS wise last year.
Yeah.
there weren't really many high spots for that team, and I don't think a lot of people expected anything because a lot of those players came from like Gen GS, like,
Yeah.
and some of them had only ever played in Korea Cups, which aren't even like contenders. So he was kind of in a tough spot, and having him on this team, I think it's going to give him a ton of experience around very experienced off tanks and very experienced main tanks, and having the ability to kind of grow from there, I think is a good look for Bernard, and he's probably going to shine more than he ever has done, even if he gets only a couple of games in this season.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to talk about Element Mystic, Jaws, so I'm going to give you another opportunity here when we talk about the support line, because Bebe has left the team and moved over to the Washington Justice, and that has opened up a gap in the flex support role, which has been filled by MCD, and they have Coldest on the roster as well, who is somebody that hasn't really been integrated effectively over the course of, because I'm not tripping here. Coldest was on the team last year, right? And he just didn't get playtime because they hadn't integrated him properly.
He played a couple of maps, didn't he? Didn't he play some Honor?
Yeah, I mean, he played a little bit, but
he played one game against the Hunters. And wait, let me see how many maps that was.
From what I saw,
Gibraltar or something, or maybe that was.
Dude, he played one map, and it was Lijiang Tower against the Chengdu Hunters, and they lost that. The only map in this series they lost. He was on the team.
But I think that he's one of those players that's criminally underused in the Overwatch League. When I watched him play in contenders, he's crazy talented. He's definitely better mechanically than a player like Bebe. And he didn't get used last year for whatever reason. And one of the problems with the communication between the Western side, or the Anglophone side, let's say, of the Overwatch League and the non-Anglophone, is that we just don't get information like that pass through. Is like, well, why was Coldest never actually fielded last year? What specifically were the problems? Is it a comms issue? Because if so, maybe that's not going to get fixed in the future. But they've at least kept him around for this year, so they must still believe that there's some potential to be mined from Coldest. And I feel like that is the way forward, because MCD is an Element Mystic alumni, but I still feel better about Coldest. At this point, having talked about the main tank, the off tank, and now the flex support, I'd be wanting them to run a full Chinese team in terms of those three if I had the reins of the roster.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I could definitely see it. I'm happy that MCD is finally in the league. Maybe a little bit biased from Element Mystic standpoint. Of course, he did play way back on Foxes and whatnot in early contenders in 2018. But the backline's so interesting, because if you are running Gushue and Ligue, I feel like you might as well be running Coldest as I'm happy for MCD who's coming in, but I agree. I just think you run Coldest in this situation. In fact, I think you run the majority of the Chinese players that aren't on the DPS.
I mean, hell, you could be running Mika as well. Mika actually did get integrated towards the end of the season with the Hangzhou Spark, and Mika looked good. Mika looked really good, and there wasn't just the situation of like, oh, Mika comes in and plays Mercy for them. Mika was playing some Lucio for them. Mika was playing some Mercy for them. I can't remember whether Mika played Brig for them as well, or whether that was even in the meta at the time. But I remember being pretty impressed by how Mika was playing. I mean, there's 4 good Chinese players that I would consider to be good starters for the team. I know IDK is very good, but if you had Gushue, Ligue, and Coldest, I'd be wanting to run Mika as well at that point. It becomes a bit of a snowball of like getting the Chinese talent together.
This is the issue that I mentioned before. They have so many options now with no clear reason as to why. It's not because they're like rounding out like the flexibility of like different metas or whatever. That's not what it feels like in a way.
Are they snapping up people to just sell like later down the line?
They're just trying to sell them to Chengdu next year.
Do you know what I mean? Like, hang on a second. Do they just... Hey, Takiaki, come here, lad. You're going to be in the league at some point soon. MCD, come on down. We'll roll the red carpet out for you because, we may not be playing you a ton, but you're pretty good. And you're probably going to be in the league next year as well. So we're going to sell you. That's honestly what it feels like talking through the team now because, Gushue, Ligue, Cool. Coldest, Mika, you're in, baby. Let's go. 4 Chinese
IDK.
players.
I gotta speak up for IDK.
Go on,
Sorry.
go on, Johnny. Go on.
I will say that yes, Shy is incredible, and I probably want to see him in the starting roster for most of the time. But my man IDK, I got a weak spot for IDK. Call me a simp, if you will.
Okay.
But I do. Yeah, I would probably prefer to see IDK in the lineup more so than Mika. But, you know, at the end of the day, who communicates better with the team? It's a main support role. Maybe you want Mika in there. So, you know, who knows? But I don't think that we should overlook some of these Korean players either, because it is legitimately competitive within this team. I would probably say that I the difference between Coldest and MCD is probably one of the biggest within the teams. I prefer Coldest over MCD most of the time. But then even if you get to the DPS lineup, like, okay, you have Godspeed and Architect, which are two
perfect.
I hesitate to say perfect or like even really good, because I think that, you know, based on community sentiment anyway, I think community sentiment is a little bit high on Godspeed. I used to be a big fan of Godspeed when he played in Apex.
I can't get out of me, mate. I'm sorry.
But he has come down for me a little bit, where I'm like, okay, this is a really flexible guy. He can play most of the heroes you ask from him, but the peak performance is not quite there on most of those heroes. So I almost would like to see a world where we see Shy and Architect some of that time, and then you have Godspeed to like round out, because Shy, I mean, Sideshow, you haven't introduced him, but Shy is legitimately a fantastic player coming out of Chinese contenders too. With the potential to bring something special to the APAC region. So,
absolutely,
you know, it's another Chinese player on this roster that could really be a breath of fresh air and be unexpected, positively unexpected.
The more we speak about it, bro, I'm like, wait a second, just run, apart from the DPS, the full Chinese lineup some of the time, then run the full Korean lineup some of the time. Because at the moment, like, who works best with who? I do think I just see it happening at this point. We talked about it a little bit too much.
It's so bad. That would suck so much, though.
I know it would. That's the thing, because you can't just keep rotating 2 rosters out. One is always going to look better than the other, and then the other literal half of the team, because they've got so many players, are stuck on the bench.
But also,
this is crazy, man.
I think running 2 rosters won't work for other reasons too. Like at some point during the season, probably double flex support is going to be meta. And, and I think at that point, if you've done the work to integrate the rosters properly, you could well get more value out of running MCD and Coldest together.
Sure.
I also think that, you know, when you look at the DPS line for this team, you're going to have to run some kind of integrated roster anyway. You can't run a full Chinese roster. They can't be speaking. Well, I mean, if one of these Korean guys is exceptionally talented at languages, I suppose they could be speaking English sometimes and Mandarin sometimes as well. But I don't know how common it is for Korean people to learn Mandarin. I don't know, but that doesn't feel like something that would be common within Korea. I don't know. But the
not 1,000% sure.
But whatever roster they run, I think there's no question that it's going to be extraordinarily talented. Whatever DPS line you pick, assuming that So Min-soo is going to be rotated in on, I don't know, specific stuff that he's needed for. I don't know. I don't have an answer for why So Min-soo is on the team, but they picked him up for some reason, and there are a lot of people...
I'm going to call it now. It's probably Zarya.
There are a lot of people out there who believe that So Min-soo's reputation within the community has been skewed by his time on the Vancouver Titans, because they still believe in how good he was before he joined that team and like the depth of heroes he played. I'm not one of those people. I don't know why he's on the team, but I think this is an opportunity perhaps for him to reinvent himself, and the word So Min-soo will not be synonymous with Flashbang Fang the Hammer in someone.
Oh.
Maybe he can like chill and play some Ashe or something once in a blue moon, just to let Shy carry.
Let me sit back and play the Ashe.
I mean,
hey, can someone bot me real quick?
Yeah.
I am not a So Min-soo simp. I do like Shy though, and Shy is going to take up most of the hit scan time on this roster, whether you want it or not.
Very good Widow player.
Definitely. And I think the general rotation of Shy and Godsby when it comes to hit scan, and then Godsby with a little bit of flex, Shy with a little bit of flex, Architect for the majority of the flex. That should cover literally every role. I mean, these 3 players are more well-rounded than some 4 or 5-man DPS lines that we have in the league. So I feel pretty comfortable about the DPS. The question for me when it comes to the Spark, the big question is whether you believe their value on paper or whether you think that it's going to be hard to make that a reality. Because to me, the problem with the Spark in the past has not been the quality of them on paper. On paper, what did they run last year? Gushui and the QOQ or Rhea that they rotated through?
It was Rhea,
Yeah.
Whatever tank line they had, the back line of Bebe and IDK, and then a front line of Godsby and Architect, that was fine. That was good. It was above average. And that should have been able to get them further than it did. The thing that held them back, in my opinion, when I watched them, was their team play, was their understanding of the meta, was their speed at reacting to things, and they kind of played a bit more of a slow reactive play style a lot of the time. I think that's the next level for these guys. It's not necessarily the individual skill, although that has been potentially improved with Liga and even Benar, and then Coldest being integrated, and Shy being added. The individual skill has improved on paper. But to me, where you rank the Spark comes down to how much you believe in the actual functioning of the team play, the communication, the VOD review sessions. Like, how seamlessly is all that shit going to work? How are they going to manage the roster? And are they going to be able to come together as a team? Johnny, I can tell already you're not a believer.
No, I am not a believer. Do you want to get to the grades?
Yeah, do you want to give me a grade, Jonathan?
Yeah, go for it.
Give me for you specifically, Johnny, give me an on paper grade and then an in reality grade.
Okay. I mean, I am paranoid at this stage. Because also, this might turn out to be like my worst take of the entire 2021 season. Because like I'm so like frightened to like this roster when on paper it's like good and people are like so hyped about it. Like I look at people who are like excited for this and I'm like, can you not see it? Like, can you not see the warning signs? Like, are you just like obliviously just joyful without considering like the potential downfalls? And so I feel like a fool. I feel like I'm a fool and everyone else is out enjoying life. They're on the beach, taking the sun, having coronas, and I'm just like, no, stay inside. No. So on paper, I'll give it a B on paper. In actuality, I'm going to give it a C.
Ooh. That's quite a dip.
I am frightened. They might make a fool of me. They might pop off. They might be top 3 APAC. But me no bueno. I don't know.
My grades are a full higher than yours. On paper, I think this looks like an A-tier roster.
Ooh.
I actually think I'm really high on this paper on this roster on paper.
This paper on roster.
Yeah,
I'm really high on this paper roster.
This roster to me has talent. It's like it's dripping. And then when it comes to the reality, I think they're going to be one of the more inconsistent teams in the league. When it comes to APAC, that's going to cost them matches. And I think they're going to be slow off the gun. And when you only have... The Hangzhou Spark have always been slow to adapt and like pick up metas. And I think when you have only 4 games for a stage to learn a meta, and you only have 16 games overall, I think that's going to drag them down a full tier. And maybe even a little bit more because of how competitive APAC is. So I'm so high on this roster on paper. So high. And yet, in actuality, I think they're going to be somewhere in the middle of the pack when it comes to APAC. And I think they're going to be B tier overall. Maybe even like a B minus, like a Chengdu team. I genuinely think they're going to be real rivals with Chengdu for totally different reasons.
I actually fully agree with your rating. Fully agree. I think on paper, Johnny, I think on paper, yeah, they're pretty cracked out. I was going to say something like an A minus, but yeah, A, yeah, and then depending on how it goes, probably like a B plus. But I can see the big gigantic pendulum swinging the other way and hitting that B tier pretty fast if they don't figure stuff out and figure out what kind of roster and what kind of team they want to be as well. Because this team, I feel, could form into so many different identities at this point in time. It's very hard to tell where they're actually going to end up because of this ginormous roster.
Yeah, I think the coaches have got a very hard job. And they're also, I'd like to point out, this is a real test for Pejon. Pejon had an easy...
You had that French accent to it.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why I said it.
Pejon.
Pejon. How do you normally pronounce his name? I've forgotten. Is it Pajon? I don't know.
Pajon?
Okay, I'm going to call him Pajon.
I'd butcher it.
Pajon has had easy teams to manage in the past, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I think he's worked with Fusion University,
and the Titans,
and then he's worked with the Vancouver Titans. And I'm talking old Vancouver Titans. He didn't have to manage any of that mess that they became. So this guy has essentially coasted through in his head coach positions with teams that he hasn't had to do that much with. This team needs so much decision-making when it comes to the coaching. So much needs to be hands-on when it comes to Pejon. And Pejon has U4 next to him, a coach that has a history of fucking up Shanghai Season 1, to be honest, even though he has had some success recently being an assistant coach with the Spark. And then Andante, who people do rate pretty highly. So I think I don't want to make any claims about whether this is a good coaching staff or a bad coaching staff. I actually think it's pretty impossible to tell from the outside right now. But this year is their test of whether they can do anything with this roster. Because this roster on paper, if you manage to maximize value, is cracky. It's crispy.
What is that?
Do you want me to give you my Doomsayer Dante 7 Hell?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, here's my Dante 7 Hell kind of narrative for Hangzhou this season. And if I'm wrong here, blame it on the fact that it's 5:35 p.m. We've been recording for 4.5 hours, and I haven't eaten a thing today. I'm very grumpy. I'm very hungry. Okay, this is. It starts off rough for the Hangzhou Spark. Bit all over the place, a bit of a clown fiesta, as you say. They sub some players in, out, etc. They don't have a solid plan. Okay.
Yep.
Somewhere between like mid stage 2, Pejon Mustard gets fired, kicked off the head coaching role. It's like couldn't really establish like an alpha kind of plan. Like couldn't really grasp it. We had a lot of talent. He couldn't really make it happen. Okay. U4 gets promoted to head coach. Plays 4 to 5 Chinese players, pretty much all game. Gets some more consistent results. Not quite what you like. Maybe you have like 1 or 2 Korean players just like not really getting our fair chance here. See some transfers happening. Still see some good results, and we see them in like 4 to 5 in the APAC region. That's my Doomsayer Dante 7 Hell kind of narrative for Hangzhou Spark this season. Can we get that? Can we make that sponsored by like some super spicy fried chicken company? Yeah, like a new McDonald's. Don't they have a new like spicy hot sauce kind of thing?
You could just
we can make that. Johnny's Dante 7 Hell. Johnny's 7 Hell. That's the new sponsored segment.
We could get the we could get like the like canned chicken that never goes off that people buy when they doomsday prep. We could get like stuff that people get when they doomsday prep, and it's just, hey, this is the doomsday take, sponsored by canned chicken.
Or baked beans.
Yeah, baked beans. Heinz beans.
Jugs of water.
Right, well, there you have it. Some of us optimistic. Some of us literally doomsday prepping and calling for the heads of head coaches that haven't even played a game already. So
they're going to be top 2.
Is he Nostradamus? Does he just need more food? Who knows? You can follow us on Twitter down at the at Plat Chat Podcast, and we'll be doing another couple of these for Dallas, Philadelphia, and the San Francisco Shock next week. Oh baby, that's a hot week. We'll see you then.